Father and Jesus the Christ. Our gospel lesson this morning features a lawyer who comes to Jesus with some questions. In most gospel accounts, we would hear such a person referred to as a scribe rather than a lawyer. Both refer to someone who is well versed in scriptural law. But Luke seems to favor the term lawyer. And in our society, lawyers don't have a very good reputation. In fact, they're often the subject of jokes, and I can think of a lot of them. For instance, what's the difference between a lawyer and God? God doesn't think he's a lawyer. And why was the lawyer skimming the Bible right before he died? He was looking for loopholes. That last joke might well describe the lawyer in our gospel. First he asked, "What must I do to inherit eternal life?" And rather than giving him an answer, a direct answer, Jesus asked this expert in the law what the law says. And the man answers with what is called the Shema in the Jewish tradition, which comes from the book of Deuteronomy. It is one of the most well-known passages from what we refer to as the Old Testament. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. This lawyer also adds in the book of Leviticus, and your neighbor as yourself. So the key points here are to love God and to love your neighbor. Jesus commends the lawyer saying, "You have answered rightly." So clearly the lawyer knows what one has to do. He need not have bothered to ask Jesus, but then as Jesus continues, "Do this and you will live." Perhaps this lawyer knows what he should do, but isn't actually practicing it. And so we are told that in order to justify himself, whereas the earlier joke put it, to find any loopholes, the lawyer asked, "Who is my neighbor?" The lawyer may have been expecting an answer that would limit who he must love as neighbor, perhaps just those in his social circle, or perhaps his fellow lawyers and scribes, perhaps those who are physically his neighbors and those who live near him. But as Jesus does so often, he does not give a direct answer, or even an indirect answer. Instead, he tells a parable, one that we all know so very well, one we call the Good Samaritan. Most of you can probably recite the key points of this parable from memory. A man goes down from Jerusalem to Jericho. He is attacked and robbed, left for dead along the side of the road. The priest comes by, but does not help. Similarly, a Levite comes by, but does not help. Finally, a Samaritan comes by and not only helps the man, but takes him to the inn and pays for his stay there while he recovers. Now, to flesh out this parable a little bit before getting to the moral of the story, we don't know anything about the man who was attacked. We don't know if he was Jewish, a Samaritan, a foreigner of high standing in society, or more lowly. And after having been robbed and stripped, there's probably no way for any of the three of men who came across this man to know who he is either. His status and identity are not important to our story. There are the first two passers-by, one a priest and the other a Levite. Levites were the tribe that was responsible for taking care of the temple. And priests were not only Levites, but specifically descendants from Aaron, Moses' brother. Both of these men, because of their positions in Jewish society, would normally be expected to behave in the best possible way, but instead behave badly with respect to the man who was attacked. We don't know why they passed the man by, but they did. The one who did respond to the plight of the man who was attacked is described as a Samaritan. The fact that he is a Samaritan is key to this parable. These Samaritans were despised by the Jewish people. They considered Samaritans to be half-breeds, Jews who had intermarried with pagans and thus were defiled and unfit for God's service. After all, Samaritans were people of the promise who did not value the promise enough to keep themselves pure. Ceremonially unclean, socially outcast, and religiously a heretic, the Samaritan is the very opposite of the lawyer, as well as the priest and the Levite. The story would have been shocking one to those in Jesus' day, shattering the categories of who are and who are not the people of God. Then, to get back to the lawyer's question, Jesus asked the lawyer, which of the men was the neighbor to the man who was attacked? The lawyer answers correctly that it is the man who showed the man mercy. Notice that the Lord can't even seem to name the neighbor as a Samaritan, but just as the one who showed mercy. Such was the disdain Jews had for Samaritans. On the surface, the Lord is asking who he must love as a neighbor. However, at the same time, he's asking Jesus to define the boundaries so that he will know who he is not required to love. If he can determine who is his neighbor, he will also know who is not his neighbor. But Jesus has completely turned the tables on the lawyer. Not only is it a Samaritan that has been shown to be the hero of the story, but Jesus changes how the question about neighbors is even asked. Instead of identifying in advance some group of people that are to be defined as neighbors, and therefore those who are not neighbors, Jesus defines neighbors as those who help one another. It's about actions, not identity. Instead of loving and helping only those who we think of as our neighbors, those that we love and help become our neighbors. I'd like to close with a related story called Long Spoons. A holy man was having a conversation with the Lord one day and said, "Lord, I would like to know what heaven and hell are like." The Lord led the holy man to 2 doors. He opened one of the doors and the holy man looked in. In the middle of the room was a large table, and on that table was a large pot of stew, and it smelled so good the holy man's mouth started to water. The people sitting around the table were thin and sickly, like they hadn't eaten in a long time. They appeared to be famished. They were holding spoons with very long handles that were strapped to their arms, and each found it possible to reach into the pot of stew and take a spoonful, but because the handle was longer than their arms, they could not get the spoons back into their mouths. The holy man shuddered at the sight of their misery and suffering. The Lord said, "You have seen hell." They went to the next room and opened the door, and it was exactly the same as the first room. There was a large round table with a large pot of stew on it, which smelled really good and made the holy man's mouth water again. The people were equipped with the same long-handled spoons, but here the people were well-nourished and they were all kind of fat and happy. Like joking and laughing, and the holy man said, "I don't understand." "It's simple," said the Lord. "It requires but one skill. You see, they have learned to feed each other, while those in hell think only of themselves." Amen. Join singing our hymn number 708.